Welcome back to the Beyond Cloud series of Discovery Discussions, presented by Intelligent HQ and hosted in London at Groupe INSEEC. Today we're meeting with Doug Clark, Cloud Lead for UK and Ireland for IBM. Doug, thanks for joining us today in the Beyond Cloud series. I'd like to start off with a little bit around your title at IBM as the Cloud Lead for UK and Ireland, as well as your Twitter handle, Cloud Stuff. There's definitely a recurring theme here, so I'd like to know a little bit about your job, how cloud has changed it, which clearly it has from the sounds of your title, and also a little bit about the risks and opportunities along the way.
Okay. So my name's Doug Clark. I look after cloud computing for IBM in the UK and Ireland. Cloud computing is a new way of providing IT and capability from IBM. New in the sense that we've really started to drive it as a strategic growth initiative in IBM since like 2010. But when you actually look under the covers, we've been doing cloud-like stuff for maybe even 40 years, because you could argue that the mainframe, which most people would associate with IBM, is actually a cloudified environment. So there's a lot of, if you like, pedigree or history there. But from an IBM point of view, I look after cloud computing from across the whole portfolio of IBM's brands. So whether it's software, and therefore software as a service, whether it's some of our IT services that are actually deep in the data center, or whether it's consulting services, or even the hardware that sits in the data center. So I kind of span, or I've got the privilege of spanning the whole portfolio from IBM. And more importantly as well, it's how that portfolio integrates and hooks in the ecosystem of business partners. So not just our own software portfolio, for example, Daniel, but also looking at software coming in from third-party ISVs, big and small, that we can install on our cloud environment that will give added value to our client sets. Because ultimately, we're all here to help make our clients more efficient and more adaptive, more agile in the market.
I really like the sound of a privileged role in IBM, because you're essentially a cloud consultant to the rest of the business, and I would consider that to be a privilege, because you get to work with a diverse set of people with a completely different set of responsibilities. Everybody else in IBM kind of has a target. How do they measure you? Because you're kind of delivering to everybody else's targets.
Well, in a way, I do have kind of an overlay sales target from that point of view. But about 2010, 2011, our chief executive, our chairman, our president, Sam Parmisano, and subsequently Ginny Rometty, who took on the mantle from him recently, made a forward statement to the market, the investors, that we were going to drive a number of growth initiatives. So they were, analytics, they were mobility and social, they were growth markets, and cloud fits into that as well. In a way, cloud is kind of the odd one of the bunch, because it's the enabler that sits underneath it. But we made a statement that we would drive $7 billion worth of revenue through our cloud by 2015. And within that, therefore, typical corporate, as you would expect, that's been allocated out to all of the geographies. So I do have a physical target.
7 billion is, as a percentage of IBM, is how much? Because it sounds like a big number.
I really don't know. Don't take me there. It's a significant amount of money. I can promise you that from a standing start. And in a way, it is overlaid, because in moving that amount of business to a cloud environment, or cloud-labeled environments, because what we're doing is we're evolving our own architectures as well. We're evolving our own product sets. We're acquiring new product sets and new offerings all of the time. But by evolving that, and we're evolving ourselves into becoming a cloud-enabled enterprise within our own being, right? But in doing so, we're able to track that transition. So of that 7 billion, there was 3 billion of it was quoted to be net new, and 4 billion of it was to be transitioned from, if you like, the older way of doing things, or the traditional way of doing things, to doing it in the cloud. So we are actively tracking all of that process, and that's, if you like, part of my role. And I would see it really almost as being, intrapreneurial. So I see IBM, the corporation, or my UK management as being, if you like, my venture capital investors. They're investing in me and my team, and we have to contribute, performance back to them as that journey's progressed.
I'm really quite pleased to hear you answer one of my standard arguments with people by the way that you define the 7 billion, because 3 is new and 4 is transitioning the old is pretty significant. I look at articles that we've seen the hype coming out over the past year. 10 million new jobs to be created because of cloud. That probably means 9 million other jobs that won't be created by another piece of IT in a different space. So there's always that type of a barrier, the same way as when people are looking at their past investment to the current. And I think IBM is probably in a position where they're as intimately involved in that customer's current investment as they are in the future, whereas other businesses are, if you've done a sell and leave type of a relationship, then all you're interested is in the new thing. So
exactly, and the way you also need to consider it is that 4 billion that is the transitioned value is 4 billion that we're earning already, if you like, in terms of services we're delivering to our clients. So we're having to transform those clients as well as, if you like, transform ourselves in flight to make them cloud enabled as part of that journey, because those, if you like, those services revenues are services revenues that's done today on traditional IT and part of an ongoing contract to a future state, which is services that are done on a cloud platform. So it could be hosted by IBM, it could be maintained in their own premises, but we manage it. It's all these different permutations and combinations of the estate.
It's actually a very interesting point that you talk about, Doug, because not all clouds are the same. They aren't the same flavor, they aren't the same size, and they don't necessarily mean the same thing. And I think that there's a huge amount of confusion that I think the industry journalism side of the world is making it a little bit more difficult. It moves us quite nicely into the second question, because cloud is being seen, along with some other things, as the next big thing. A lot of the last big things that we've seen resulted in people repeating what they had done in the past in the new flavor, in the new technology. So if you're taking something that works today and moving it to the cloud simply to move it to the cloud, that to me isn't quite as exciting and as valuable as the things that you can do new. And you need to figure out how to position the old to plan and meet with the new as you go along. Are you finding this issue with your customers, or are they going for replacements?
No, you're absolutely right. And if you like, my history from an IT point of view is ERP systems and implementing ERP systems, and what you can do is end up by putting in a very expensive new ERP system that is exactly the same as your old pre-system, if you like. So you're kind of right. So there is an opportunity here for people to transform, to change things. And you're also correct, I think, in terms of what I believe our clients have been doing. They've not been sitting back waiting for this thing to happen, right? They have been tuning their platforms, their IT estates and architectures over a number of years. So we've seen them move to a more virtualized environment. They're standardizing. Things like ERP systems help them standardize, or should help them standardize. And then we can move more to an automated and, if you like, a utility or a self-service type environment. And each one of those steps, if you like, on a ladder is moving you more to a cloudified or a cloud-based environment. Do you ever get to the end of the journey? Well, I don't know, to be honest. I think there are always going to be ways of just enhancing performance a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And personally, I try not to get too hung up, as you were describing there, on the definitions of what is cloud, what isn't cloud. It's really, for me, more a case of listening to the clients, the customers, and trying to think about, so what is the business outcome you're trying to do? And in some cases, if we turn back and look at the legacy estates, then we need to be really careful here that we're allowing the client or the existing environment to keep the lights on, right? Because that's driving business today. But a lot of the areas I was talking about early on are the newer workloads where perhaps the clients don't have the skills, or perhaps where shadow IT is starting to destabilize the symmetry within the organization. And what I mean by that is, all of the IT resources are keeping the lights on and patching and maintaining the existing legacy estate, whereas the business is saying, no, we need to be doing this mobile stuff, we need to be doing this social stuff, and they're kind of getting ahead of themselves a little bit and almost, self-feeding, which is dangerous because that creates risks and discontinuities within the overall IT estate, and obviously puts everybody's environment more at risk, destabilizes.
Now, like some of those last big things, this is exactly what's happened along the way. And you,
Yep.
Whether it was an office wanting PCs in the mid '80s or people wanting to move to mobile phones in the last few years and everything that's in between, there's always an appetite for more from the business than there is from IT. IT is always typically seen as a company, a security guard. They're a barrier. They stop you from getting accomplished what you want, when what they're really trying to do is live within their budgets to deliver all of these things that,
Sure.
as time goes on, it's more and more. Are we actually getting better with that with cloud, or are we just really propagating the same behaviors?
No, I think it's different. We've written a white paper about the future of the IT department, and it's not, it's not prescriptive. It kind of, in a way, creates a number of questions rather than a lot of the answers. But what it's saying is the IT environment needs to evolve. And actually, certainly from a UK and Ireland point of view, we've already gone through a lot of transitions in IT. We're a very services-centric geography anyway, okay? Mm-hmm. A lot of those services have already transitioned to things like ERP. We've already embraced things like outsourcing. We're probably on generation 2 or even generation 3 of that kind of sourcing environment. So things, we've always been evolving and been transitioning. So I think, yes, there are clients that have, data centers on site and all of that, but there's a whole mixed estate where data centers could be almost anywhere, services could be provided, currently from almost anywhere, and the IT department really spans all of that kind of footprint. I think what we're talking about with cloud is achieving the benefits that cloud brings. So things like, agility and flexibility, and some of the things that I think the business, because of initiatives like social and mobile, there's a much more urgent need to respond and fit the market and the pace and the momentum of the market. And I think traditionally, change management and patch management and all those good IT governance processes, which ultimately are still right because they're there to protect the enterprise, and all of the ITIL and scar tissue that's been built off of, good long earned experience, that all still needs to exist, but it needs to somehow morph. And if you can automate or standardize and automate a lot of that piece, that legacy estate, if you like, you can move those skills more to the front of the plane to where the real action is, the future action is, and start to shape that, and I guess recapture that shadow IT environment we were talking about before.
I think that's probably why a lot of people are starting to look at standards and regulation, and I think they're mixing the words up and they're combining them in a different way. Of course, standards being a certain way to do things that we all tend to follow because it's better and cheaper and more coordinated to do it that way, as opposed to regulation, which is the government getting involved. Now, we've got lots of requirements for regulation, things like data security, privacy, and all of this. Do you feel that there's a role for government in regulating the cloud industry different than they have regulated the IT industry or other industries in the past? Or do you have an answer to the critics who are saying that yes, that is necessary?
I guess it's a bit of both, really. I mean, as long as it's in a positive, constructive way, I think it's probably a good thing. I think there's an awful lot of inherent regulation, as you're just describing it there, in terms of privacy of data or financial information, or what needs to be on terra firma in, say, the UK, or what's allowable in Europe, or what's suitable outside. But I was saying it's not necessarily something that's only just cropped up because of cloud. As I was just describing, an awful lot of my clients are already using resources and outsourced services in other geographies. So, why does cloud necessarily make it different? I think it's, in a way, it's just the opportunity that cloud brings is to create an environment that's much more hybridized. So, it could well be that that application is held somewhere out in the cloud, whereas some of your other applications are more business critical or regulatory critical. You need to absolutely know where that kind of application data is being held. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like what is fit for purpose, I think, is really the most important thing here. And I guess government regulation can play a part in that. but as long as it doesn't, if you like, slow down what is inevitably going to happen because of the market drag, right?
Well, I think fit for purpose is the key word that has probably been a critical element of what I've done throughout my career, and I know certainly with yours, trying to get people to actually use the technology to, like a machine. We use a lever to actually make something move more easily. When technology becomes more expensive or more difficult than the thing that it was meant to do in the first place, that's where
people won't adopt it.
Yeah, it starts to make a lot less sense. And from a regulation perspective, I think part of the politicians getting involved is because it's all this stuff that's being talked about. It's cool, it's interesting, there's a lot of excitement. I think another element is that there's so many people that it touches and impacts that they feel that they need to do something. And I have a feeling that there's a requirement for guidance to do it the right way. Standards, we set them in our industry. IBM has been a standard setter for lots of years, and we follow those things because they help us to do things better. I don't see regulation as in the same type of space around the companies themselves. Do you, as an IBMer, would you feel stifled by corporate regulation of that nature?
Well, at the end of the day, as long as you know what the rules of the game are, you'll adapt to the rules of the game, I guess is the answer. And as long as everybody's playing to the same rules and deploying them in the same way and managing them in the same way, I guess it's a level playing field. I think from a point of view of standards, that's an interesting point because, you know, one thing that a lot of clients are nervous about if they're making big investments, either big investments in terms of, you know, training and driving their own capabilities, or big investments in terms of moving an architecture or an environment from this state to that state, is, you know, the standards that, or the architectures that they're deploying aren't going to be obsolete almost as soon as they've implemented them. You know, we do know, for example, with social, with mobile, there's an awful lot of fashion associated with this, you know, and we know how the fashion industry works. It's very, very rapid cycles of change. You know, smartphones are almost a fashion accessory as well as a device. You need to make sure that whatever solutions you deploy have a good long lifespan associated with them. So we've just come up with a new hardware platform, Pure Systems, which is almost going to be our platform for the next 10, 15 years, right? So that, you know, we're trying to come up with something that's got a longevity associated with it, rather than necessarily thinking about systems or solutions that are very proprietary. We want systems, we're part of OpenStack, for example, and by that we're investing in OpenStack. We've got coders checking code in OpenStack, you know, so we're actively participating in it rather than necessarily trying to control it, if you like. And in doing so, I think we're creating an environment, and all of the contributors to OpenStack contributing to an environment where it gives clients fantastic flexibility and choice. To, you know, if cloud is as good as we all think it is, there's a lot of pick and mix associated with this.
Oh,
right?
yes.
So in principle, what you don't want is someone to be locked into a technology because it's proprietary. And I think that the point of standards is, or properly collated standards is, it gives people a lot more choice, and they know what they're getting, and they know, you know, they know it's going to be maintained and looked after.
I, again, couldn't disagree at all with any of that, and I guess part of the regulation that gets in the way is that if that actually stops businesses from doing things, and it stops innovation, because we tend to have things that get done a little bit differently when you have laws and rules around it. I don't believe that we've needed to regulate the computer industry over the past 20 or 30 years. It's what happens with the data and the stuff which is the real value. We don't regulate the motorway, we regulate the vehicles from going to a particular speed limit on the motorway, and I think that's the type of mentality that we need to be looking at. Okay, Doug, so that actually brings us around to the last question, and my premise is that cloud is a delivery vehicle. A lot of the cloud companies that I talk with and work with don't really like this, because I liken them to the plumbing, not to the, and that when they're going into a house to do the plumbing or the wiring, what the house owner is looking for is plumbing and wiring. But a lot of cloud people start to say you could paint your walls this color, or you could put a piece of artwork on that particular wall, and they're not necessarily where they belong. Now, some businesses are a little bit more broad encompassing and delivering different types of services, but sticking all around with cloud as being that which gets us to where we're going, I'd like to know where you think it's going to take us beyond mobile, social, and big data, and what are you expecting to be the changes in that delivery vehicle motorway along the way? Okay,
well, let's maybe start from the last bit and work the other way, and maybe sort of steer me along, because it's a long question. If we think about how do I think the the final architecture or the estate, if you like, is going to look. I personally strongly believe that we will have an architecture that is a hybridized cloud architecture. And what do I mean by that? A lot of people see cloud as being just publicly provided cloud, a utility-based, pay-as-you-click kind of cloud that sits somewhere. You know, it don't really mind where it sits, and you get your credit card out and you just buy some resource. Sure, that is certainly one type of cloud. Private cloud is another type of cloud which could be on-premise in your, the four walls of your machine room, your data center, or in a hosted environment that is dedicated to you, or maybe multi-tenant. For me, I think the end point is a little bit possibly of all of those. So I think we'll end up with this architecture that is hybridized across that kind of an estate. And depending on the different types of client, maybe a banking client will be different to a retail client, or maybe a utility client would be different to perhaps a pharmaceutical client. Each one of them is going to have their own little nuances, their own little needs, and also they've got their own demands, either regulatory demands or standards that they have to comply with, or maybe they have to keep a data store for a lot longer, for legal reasons or whatever it might be. It's airframe kind of data. They've got to keep it for 100 years or whatever it might be. So you're going to end up with a hybridized estate. And I think organizations like IBM have a role to play in that, in terms of helping create the right environment, the right architecture. And that environment, that architecture might evolve over time, as you're saying, on your motorway. So you might start, for example, by doing a little bit of something in almost a test and dev or a sandbox environment, sandpit, which you could easily do on a public cloud, right? And try out a business context, try out a scenario, or try out a number of scenarios, because it's inexpensive. So, with some consulting resource, or maybe some of your own internal resource as well, you can try out those scenarios and very quickly either fast fail them or fast forward them. And working with a client, for example, in talking about regulation, one of the new regulations in the insurance industry is Solvency II, and trying to work out, so what are the consequences of that? So one of the clients we've been working with used a public cloud environment to prototype, if you like, a number of those scenarios. Now, there was no, confidential data or personal data in there. It was all, simulated data. So it was easy to do it in that environment. They were able to turn off scenarios that were just going nowhere, but they were able to almost like focus down the tractor beam, if you like, of what is the right out point, where do we want to be? And in then doing so, they were able to harden off that solution. And ultimately, they decided, because it was the best fit for their needs, to build their own private cloud environment in a dedicated new center. Okay, so that was their journey plan. Now ultimately they're going to evolve again from that. So it's one of these things where you just always got to be looking for the what ifs, and trying to when I did my MBA, one of the rules, one of the laws, if you like, of management was to apply. I think it was called the power principle or something, but it was try and get yourself into a position where you got more options coming out, more exit options, if you like, than entry options. So I think that's where, with some of these new initiatives, like, in the social space or mobile, and none of us know, the next big killer app or the next big killer thing. We think it's probably a combination of, data from this with analytics from that, with some other third-party data. All of a sudden that together creates something which is just a wow, So let's use, these open standards, these architectures that are flexible, to enable clients to really seize on those new initiatives as they're being born, and then for them to assemble. So what is the potential for us? What is the outcome we're looking for? And then how do we then connect that into the legacy estate? And some of those legacy estates, some of those legacy apps will never migrate to cloud, right?
Probably don't have a requirement to, and some of them will eventually die.
Right? Exactly. So this is all part of this hybridized estate. But from a user's point of view, and again, coming back to some of these key concepts of cloud, which is self-service. So from a user's point of view, they don't care really what the name is on the box. They don't really care the software vendor. They're just trying to do their job, and they want something that's versatile and flexible and fit for purpose, as I described. So in a way, you need to have almost like that single pane of glass and that orchestration layer underneath that, which is almost getting back into the IT domain, that allows you to be able to suck data from this area and migrate data to that area and apply this amount of algorithmics from your predictive analytics solution or whatever it is, and be able to then provision and forward that data to that single pane of glass. So each one of those estates, if you like, or stakes in the ground, some of it might be pay-per-click, some of it may be legacy that never moves to cloud, some of it might be paid by the month or paid by the gigabyte, or so there has to be something that de-orchestrates that and allows each of those providers, whether they're internal or external, to get their revenues and their annuity streams. So it's kind of complicated, but at the front end it has to be ultimately very simple, right?
It's funny how a complicated word like orchestrate in this context is actually meant to very much simplify the things, because you have so many different angles and so many different things that you need to control, and the only real analogy that works is a conductor trying to make everybody, first of all, aware of the other instruments, secondly, aware that they're working from the same sheet of paper and taking it forward from there. I have to say your answer on this particular question definitely is the best so far, for two reasons. You've got a nice geek reference with a tractor beam in there, but also because the answer of hybrid is, historically for me, that's almost always the answer. I go into places where they always want to do this or this, and the answer is, if you would stop arguing about the same thing, maybe what you need is somewhere in the middle, right? So cloud, public, private, non-cloud, some things mobile only, some things not needing mobile. Like not every application needs to be on the phone. Sometimes It doesn't make any sense. So I find that answer to be quite compelling and keeps us on the same page as we have been in most of our conversations before.
Good.
So thanks very much for joining us, Doug. A real pleasure to have you today.
Thank you very much for having me.